Hello everyone. Welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. On May 26th, 2000, in Spokane, fraternal twins Nubia and Victor Doctor entered the world under fragile circumstances. Their mother, Sandra K. Doctor, had a long history of substance abuse involving both drugs and alcohol. Before the twins were born, she had already given birth to 4 other children, and each of them had been removed from her custody by child welfare authorities. From the very beginning, the twins' future was uncertain, shaped by instability that had started long before they took their first breath. Nubia's health added another layer of concern. She was born with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, a serious medical condition that affects the body's hormone production and requires consistent monitoring and treatment. Doctors strongly advised that she be placed in a specialized medical foster home where her condition could be carefully managed. However, her mother insisted she was sober and capable of caring for the newborns. Despite her past record, Nubia and Victor were allowed to remain in her custody, a decision that would later raise painful questions. By 2003, Child Protective Services determined that the twins were no longer safe in their mother's care. They were removed from her home and placed with their biological father, Victor Bastillo. For a brief moment, it may have seemed like a chance at stability, but that hope did not last. In 2004, Bastillo was charged with sexual battery involving a child who was not under his custody. Once again, the twins were uprooted, their lives shifting without warning as they were placed back into the foster care system. Eventually, the children were sent to live with Jorge and Carmen Barahona in Miami. The couple already had an adopted son who was autistic, and on paper, they appeared to offer a structured home environment. Jorge operated a pest control business, while Carmen stayed at home. To outside observers, they seemed stable, the kind of family the system looks for when placing vulnerable children. But warning signs surfaced quickly. Only months after Nubia and Victor arrived in the Barahona home, a nurse overseeing Nubia's medical care noticed troubling patterns. Nubia began missing important medical appointments that were essential for managing her lifelong condition. When questioned, it became clear that the Barahonas were unwilling to attend these required visits. The nurse grew increasingly concerned, eventually recommending that the couple not be permitted to adopt the twins. It was an early red flag, one that suggested neglect at a time when Nubia's health required vigilance and compassion. Even then, the system stood at a crossroads. Decisions made in these early years would shape everything that followed. By 2005, Nubia was only 5 years old, but something deeply troubling surfaced. That year, she reportedly told someone in her school that her father was molesting her. The statement immediately triggered concern, and the Department of Children and Families, DCF, opened an investigation. However, there was confusion over which father she meant, her biological father or her foster father. After reviewing the claim, investigators concluded that Nubia had been referring to her biological father, not the foster parent she was currently living with. With that interpretation, the case was closed. For the system, the alarm had been addressed. For Nubia, the moment quietly passed. The following year, in 2006, school staff noticed something else, a large bruise on Nubia's face. The injury did not look accidental to them, and they contacted authorities suspecting child abuse. The Barahonas were ordered to bring Nubia to an evaluation with the child protection team at the Department of Health in Miami. But instead of appearing immediately, they delayed the visit for an entire week. By the time Nubia was finally examined, most of the bruising had faded. State doctors ultimately accepted the explanation given by the Barahonas that Nubia had fallen. Once again, the case was closed. Another concern documented. Another opportunity that slipped away. By 2007, the pattern of concern grew stronger. School authorities reported that Nubia appeared alarmingly thin. She was often hungry, asking classmates for food. Staff also noted that she carried a strong, unpleasant odor, suggesting possible hygiene neglect. These were not small observations. They pointed toward potential long-term mistreatment. DCF launched yet another investigation, but the Barrahonas firmly denied any wrongdoing. They insisted that Nubia's frail appearance and other issues were linked to her medical condition, not neglect. With no visible proof strong enough to contradict them, the investigation was dropped. The official record would show no sustained findings. Despite these repeated warning signs, the Barrahonas moved forward in 2008 with plans to legally adopt the twins. However, their path was not entirely smooth. The children's guardian ad litem, Paul Newman, whose role was to advocate solely for the twins' best interests, raised concerns and resisted the adoption. According to the Barrahonas, Newman was interfering unfairly and operating behind their backs. They claimed his objections were not professional, but personal, describing it as a personality conflict. Determined to move forward, the Barrahonas took their fight beyond local channels. They wrote letters defending their parenting, portraying their home as loving and stable. In those letters, they described themselves as devoted caregivers who were raising their children with love, as any mother and father would do. Their appeals reached high levels of authority, including then-Governor Charlie Crist. Shortly before the adoption was finalized, Paul Newman was removed as the twins' guardian ad litem. No clear public explanation was given for his removal. Soon after, the adoption process moved forward without further resistance. On paper, everything appeared settled, official, legal, permanent. But beneath the surface, concerns had never fully disappeared. They had simply been dismissed. In May 2009, the adoption of Nubia and Victor was finalized. On paper, they were now permanently part of the Barrahona family. The long foster care journey had officially ended. What had once been temporary placements and court reviews was now a legal bond. To the outside world, it appeared that the twins had finally found stability. But the concerns did not disappear. By 2010, school officials once again raised red flags. The complaints sounded painfully familiar. Nubia was extremely thin, constantly hungry, and poorly groomed. This time, staff also noticed something new. She was losing her hair. For a young girl, it was alarming. Educators reported their concerns to child welfare authorities, fearing ongoing neglect. Yet again, investigators were met with the same explanation from the Barrahonas. They insisted Nubia's appearance was the result of her endocrine disorder and the medication she was taking to manage it. Without clear physical proof of abuse, the case was closed once more. The pattern repeated: concern, investigation, explanation, dismissal. Then came February 14th, 2011, a date that would change everything. At approximately 5 a.m. on that Monday morning, a road ranger spotted a red Toyota pickup truck parked on the shoulder of northbound Interstate 95 between Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard and 45th Street in West Palm Beach. The truck appeared abandoned but not disabled. When it remained there for over 2 hours, the road ranger grew concerned and contacted authorities. Emergency responders from West Palm Beach Fire Rescue arrived at the scene. What they found was disturbing. On the ground near the truck lay 53-year-old Jorge Barahona. Both were alive when first responders arrived, but Victor was suffering violent seizures, his small body convulsing uncontrollably. The situation quickly escalated. As firefighters approached the vehicle, one was immediately overwhelmed by a powerful chemical odor. The smell was so strong that decontamination procedures were initiated on the scene. The bed of the pickup truck was filled with large plastic containers of chemicals, some clearly labeled, others not marked at all. The truck bore the name of Jorge's pest control company, CJ Pest Control, leading investigators to initially assume the substances were pesticides. However, something didn't add up. One of the unlabeled containers appeared to contain a form of acid. Firefighters questioned why a pest extermination business would transport such a corrosive substance in that manner. The presence of the acid, combined with the overwhelming fumes and Victor's seizures, raised urgent questions about what had happened inside that vehicle. State troopers were dispatched to the listed address of CJ Pest Control, hoping to gather more information or locate additional individuals connected to the company. But when they arrived, no one could be reached. As emergency crews worked to stabilize Jorge and Victor on the side of the highway, the situation already felt far more serious than a disabled vehicle call. What began as a stranded truck on the shoulder of I-95 was rapidly unfolding into something much darker, something that would soon expose a tragedy no one had fully seen coming. As investigators examined the scene more closely, the horrifying reality became clear. Victor's body had been exposed to acid, so much so that his skin was chemically burned and the interior of the truck had absorbed the substance. The acid had soaked into the seats and carpeting, turning the air inside the vehicle toxic. The fumes were powerful enough to overwhelm trained responders. Victor and Jorge were rushed to separate hospitals for emergency treatment, while authorities secured the highway shoulder as a hazardous materials scene. By the afternoon of February 14, 2011, a city hazmat team and the state's Department of Environmental Protection had arrived to begin decontamination. Crews in protective suits carefully sorted through the chemical containers in the bed of the truck. At approximately 3:45 p.m., a contractor working with the environmental team made a grim discovery. Inside one of the large plastic tubs was a black garbage bag. When it was opened, investigators found human remains. The atmosphere shifted instantly from emergency response to homicide investigation. Federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the scene to assist, helping secure and process the contaminated area so county forensic teams could safely recover evidence. The work continued into the night. Around 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the recovered body was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy and identification. For 2 days, authorities withheld the identity of the remains from the public. The condition of the body made identification difficult. It had been severely decomposed and further damaged by acid and hazardous chemicals. Then the confirmation came. The remains belonged to Nubia Barahona, Victor's 10-year-old twin sister. The little girl, whose health struggles and warning signs had been documented for years, had been found in the back of a truck on the side of a Florida highway. Victor was immediately rushed to St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach, Florida, after the incident. His condition was critical. Doctors reported that he had suffered severe internal reactions from inhaling the toxic fumes inside the truck. Chemical burns covered large portions of his body, leaving his skin raw and blistered. As medical staff continued their assessment, they uncovered evidence of prior abuse: a broken collarbone, a fractured arm, scars across his buttocks and lower abdomen, and rope marks tightly constricting both wrists. After weeks of intensive care and recovery, Victor was finally discharged on March 2, 2011, and placed into a therapeutic foster home designed to provide specialized support for children who had experienced severe trauma. Jorge Barajona's fate took a very different turn. He was arrested on charges of child abuse relating to Victor and initially held at Columbia Hospital before being transferred to the Palm Beach County Jail on February 16, 2011. While in custody, Jorge provided a chilling confession to police. He claimed that the death of his daughter, Nubia, had driven him to despair, and he had planned to commit suicide by setting himself on fire. According to Jorge, he had chosen the shoulder of I-95 specifically so that he would be easily found. In his account, Jorge stated that he gave Victor a handful of sleeping pills. Then, with Victor's head resting in his lap, he poured gasoline over himself in preparation to ignite it. However, he claimed he did not light the fire because he did not want Victor to die with him. Investigators later discovered a red gasoline container in the truck, but was filled with acid, not gasoline. When asked why Jorge's burns were not as severe as Victor's, he claimed that some of the liquid must have splashed onto the boy. Police quickly determined that Jorge's explanation did not match the evidence. The extent and location of Victor's injuries were inconsistent with the story he had provided. The authorities concluded that the boy had suffered deliberate abuse, and Jorge's version of events could not account for the chemical burns and prior injuries observed by medical staff. The confession raised more questions than it answered, painting a picture of a man whose account was far removed from the reality of what had happened inside that truck. Autopsy results later revealed a chilling truth. Nubia had been beaten to death on February 11, 2011, the very day a Department of Children and Families official had come to investigate a report made to the abuse hotline. According to police findings, Jorge Barahona allegedly repeatedly punched and beat Nubia, ignoring her screams and cries until she was fatally harmed. What should have been a routine welfare check had tragically coincided with the final moments of the young girl's life. When questioned by investigators, Carmen Barahona, Jorge's wife, claimed that she and her husband had been separated for 6 months. Records and interviews, however, revealed that the couple had never actually been apart. Following the discovery of Nubia's death, authorities removed the other children from the home. Carmen's parents temporarily cared for them, but they were soon placed in foster care, reflecting the deep systemic failures that had allowed abuse to continue undetected for years. A disturbing family secret surfaced in the days leading up to Nubia's death. On February 10, 2011, just 4 days before the truck incident, Alessandra, the granddaughter of Carmen Barahona, confided in her therapist about what she had witnessed at her grandmother's home. She reported that Nubia and Victor were routinely bound by their hands and feet and forced to stand in a bathtub for hours. Their restraints were only removed when it was time to eat. Alessandra also described being prohibited from speaking to the twins when using the bathroom and revealed that her grandmother had instructed her not to tell anyone, insisting it was a family secret. The abuse extended beyond the twins. The couple's 11-year-old autistic son, Jorge, reportedly attempted to tell a DCF investigator about a secret concerning the children. According to reports, Carmen dismissed him, claiming he was low-functioning, and told him to watch television in another room. In this way, multiple children were silenced, leaving abuse hidden in plain sight. After Nubia's body was discovered, Alessandra was removed from her mother, Jennifer Perez, and placed in the custody of her father, Giovanni Perez. A judge also ordered that neither Jennifer nor any member of her family have contact with Alessandra. A DCF official later explained that Alessandra could no longer remain with her mother due to the psychological abuse she had endured. The report noted that Jennifer had exposed her child to the torture of the twins and repeatedly threatened her to maintain silence, effectively manipulating her into complicity. This chilling pattern of secrecy and coercion highlighted the extent to which multiple layers of neglect and abuse had gone unchecked before the tragedy unfolded. The aftermath of Nubia and Victor Barahona's tragedy sent shockwaves through Florida's child welfare system. The Florida Department of Children and Families, DCF, faced severe criticism for their handling of the case. Judge Cindy Letterman, overseeing the situation, expressed outrage at Andrea Fleary, the DCF worker assigned to investigate reports of abuse. On February 10, 2011, Fleary visited the Barahona home but failed to make contact with the children, yet still reported them as safe. When it was revealed that 11-year-old Jorge, the couple's autistic son, had tried to alert her to abuse the following day, Fleary admitted she had stopped investigating at 9 p.m., claiming investigations don't happen on weekends. Judge Letterman's response was incredulous. "So we don't do investigations on weekends? Is that what you were telling me?" DCF Secretary David Wilkins defended Fleary during hearings, stating she had been rattled and emphasizing that investigations occur 24/7. Nevertheless, Fleary was first placed on paid administrative leave and later fired. Wilkins attributed some failures to the medical conditions of the twins, which complicated investigators' assessments, and noted that the Barahonas had deceived authorities for years. He also highlighted systemic issues, criticizing the abuse hotline as operating with a low-cost call center mentality, where employees were pressured to handle calls quickly due to outdated technology, making it difficult to piece together multiple reports into a coherent case. The mishandling of the Barahona case prompted Wilkins to convene a panel including David Lawrence Jr., Bobby Martinez, and James Sewell. experts in child welfare and law enforcement, to review the department's response. Their findings were damning. DCF's handling was called inept and a failure of common sense and listening, underscoring the systemic flaws that allowed abuse to continue unchecked. Meanwhile, Jorge Barahona faced mounting legal consequences. After being informed he had to appear at a felony child abuse hearing, he attempted suicide twice in custody, first by jumping backward off a sink and later by other means. He was declared competent to stand trial, but exhibited uncooperative and self-harming behavior, leading to his placement in the jail's mental health unit. Bail was set at $1 million. Carmen Barahona filed for divorce in late February 2011, but was herself arrested on March 5, 2011, charged with first-degree murder and held without bond. Both Jorge and Carmen were eventually indicted on 18 charges, including first-degree murder, multiple counts of child abuse resulting in great bodily harm, child neglect, and mutilating a dead body. If convicted, they could face the death penalty. Both initially pleaded not guilty. Jorge's trial for Nubia's murder and Victor's attempted murder was scheduled for September 28, 2015, though jury selection was later set for July 25, 2016, after attorney delays. Prosecutors pursued the death penalty, citing the extreme and premeditated nature of the abuse. Testimony from the Barahona's 6-year-old granddaughter, who witnessed the twins suffering firsthand, painted a harrowing picture. She described a persistent pattern of psychological and physical abuse, including forcing the twins to be naked in front of visitors, attempting to drown Victor in a pool, and using ropes to choke him until he fainted. The twins were reportedly given only milk and bread to eat. Her testimony underscored the prolonged, deliberate cruelty that had occurred over the years. In April 2017, Victor Barahona received a $3.75 million settlement from the Florida Department of Children and Families. The state acknowledged that the department poorly handled the case and failed to act on multiple red flags. Years later, on February 21, 2020, Carmen Barahona pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse, agreeing to testify against Jorge as part of a plea deal. Her sentencing remains deferred pending full cooperation. If she does not comply, she still faces the possibility of the death penalty. This case remains a stark reminder of systemic failures, unchecked abuse, and the catastrophic consequences when warning signs are ignored. The legal saga of Jorge Barahona has dragged on for more than a decade, marked by delays, attacks, and repeated questions about his competence. On February 26, 2020, his lawyers requested a postponement of his trial, citing Carmen Barahona's ongoing plea deal as a reason to delay proceedings. Just over a year later, on March 1, 2021, Jorge was violently attacked while sleeping in the pretrial detention center. According to reports, 5 other inmates assaulted him because of the nature of his pending charges. He suffered multiple facial bruises, a nosebleed, and a small cut, highlighting the continued risks he faced even while in custody. The legal delays continued. By August 2021, Jorge dismissed his legal team and sought further postponements, extending the timeline even longer. As of February 2024, court hearings regarding his competence to stand trial were again rescheduled. Local media noted that, after 13 years, the case is still nowhere near trial, pointing to a combination of shifting judges, changing attorneys, and repeated requests for delays from Jorge himself. Gail Levine, the original prosecutor on the case, explained that due to judges' calendars, due to the defense, and the attorney's decision to go to trial on other cases, Jorge Barahona's case took a back seat. Finally, in July 2025, the court ruled that Jorge Barahona was competent to stand trial. As of October 1st, 2025, the proceedings were focused on evaluating his options for legal representation, signaling that after years of delays, the case was slowly moving closer to a resolution. The long, drawn-out nature of the Barahona trial has underscored not only the complexity of the case, but also the challenges of navigating the criminal justice system in prolonged, high-profile cases. Case 2, Erica Lynn Parsons entered the world on February 24th, 1998, born to Carolyn Parsons. Her early life was already complicated. Carolyn had ended her relationship with Steve, a man who was not Erica's biological father, before Erica was born. At the time, Carolyn was raising 3 other children and felt overwhelmed, unsure if she could provide the care Erica needed. Determined that her daughter would not grow up in foster care or homeless shelters like she once had, Carolyn made the heart-wrenching decision to place Erica with family she trusted. Erica was welcomed into the home of Sandy and Casey Parsons, who were the brother and sister-in-law of Carolyn's husband. They quickly became her new family, and by 2000, the adoption was officially finalized. Even after the adoption, Carolyn maintained occasional contact, visiting Erica from time to time. Their last meeting took place in January 2011, marking the end of regular contact between biological mother and daughter. Meanwhile, Erica's biological father, Billy Dean Goodman, lived a quiet life away from the public eye until his death from natural causes in 2016. Growing up, Erica faced her own personal challenges. She had a slight hearing impairment, which affected her early learning experiences. For most of her school years, she was homeschooled, a choice that shaped much of her childhood and the way she experienced the world around her. Despite these hurdles, Erica's life was filled with the care and support of her adoptive family, who tried to provide stability in a world that had already been uncertain for her. On the morning of July 30th, 2013, a shocking call to authorities would unravel a dark family secret. Jamie Parsons, Erica's adoptive brother who was 19 at the time, reported his sister missing. What made the situation even more alarming was what Jamie revealed to police. He claimed he hadn't seen Erica in nearly 2 years and that she had been abused by their adoptive parents. He went as far as saying he believed his parents had killed her and buried her in the backyard. While he later retracted these explosive statements, Jamie would testify during his parents' trial that abuse had, indeed, been a constant in Erica's life. Jamie recounted the last time he saw Erica, November 19th, 2011. She was standing alone in a corner, a punishment she reportedly endured often. She didn't look too good. She looked like a zombie, he testified. She said she did not feel good. She said she could not breathe too good. Disturbingly, when Erica voiced her discomfort, Casey Parsons, her adoptive mother, snapped at her, telling her to shut the fuck up. The following morning, Jamie noticed something was off. His parents had left the house unusually early, and when they returned, Erica was gone. Jamie recalled the chilling scene. Mama looked normal, he said. Daddy looked sick, like he was about to throw up. He described his mother retreating to the recliner with her computer, while his father stared blankly ahead. When Jamie finally asked where Erica had gone, his parents told him she had gone to live with her biological grandmother, a story that would later unravel as the truth of Erica's disappearance came alight. As Erica's disappearance drew attention, police launched a full-scale investigation into the Parsons household. Casey and Sandy Parsons quickly offered an explanation. They claimed Erica had gone to live with her biological paternal grandmother, Irene N. Goodman, in Asheville, North Carolina. According to them, they first contacted Irene in July 2011 after she supposedly wanted to build a relationship with her granddaughter. But investigators hit a dead end. There was no evidence that Irene Goodman even existed. In fact, Erica's biological father, Billy Goodman, had insisted before his death in 2016 that there was no Irene Goodman in his family, and his mother, Chloe Goodman, had passed away years earlier in 2005. Casey Parsons gave a detailed account of Erica's alleged visits with this grandmother. She said the first meeting occurred at a McDonald's in Mooresville, North Carolina, in September 2011, followed by several additional visits. During one visit in December 2011, Erica reportedly asked to stay with her grandmother permanently. Casey claimed that in February 2012, just before Erica's 14th birthday, she had her last conversation with her daughter over the phone. After that, Casey said all calls went to a disconnected number, which she later admitted she had lost. The Parsons even appeared on national television to share their story. On August 20th and 21st, 2013, Casey and Sandy went on Dr. Phil, presenting their version of events. Casey told the host that Erica had taken none of her personal belongings because they had purchased all new clothing for her to wear with her grandmother. A woman nicknamed Strawberry was allegedly present when Irene picked Erica up, showing a stash of tagged clothing in the back of their van. Casey also claimed that their other daughter, Brooke, had accompanied them on the trip to Asheville. But when police interviewed Brooke, she firmly disputed the story, insisting she never traveled to North Carolina to take Erica to live with her grandmother. As the trial of Sandy and Casey Parsons unfolded, horrifying details about Erica's life in their home began to surface. Multiple witnesses painted a grim picture of routine abuse, particularly at the hands of her adoptive mother, Casey. Casey's own sister, Robin Ashley, took the stand and described scenes of relentless cruelty. She testified that Casey would beat Erica and often force her stand in the corner as punishment. In court, photographs were presented showing Erica standing in a corner on 5 separate occasions. Ashley also revealed that she had seen bruises and marks covering Erica's body, and at one point, Casey had even handed Erica over to Ashley's care for several months, fearing she might kill her. Yet Casey soon took her back, worried she would get into trouble for continuing to cash checks for a child who was no longer living with her. Court records confirmed the Parsons were still cashing these checks, even while Erica was absent from the home. Erica's adoptive brother, Jamie Parsons, delivered chilling testimony about the extent of the abuse. He explained that nearly every member of the family participated and that Casey actively encouraged the mistreatment. Jamie recalled horrifying incidents. Casey would reportedly bend Erica's fingers backward in attempts to break them, then deny her medical care, resorting instead to homemade casts. Erica was forced to live in a closet, sometimes locked inside for hours, and beaten whenever she relieved herself there. Jamie even testified that she was made to eat kin dog food at times. The abuse wasn't limited to Casey. Jamie described instances where Erica's adoptive father, Sandy, would become enraged and punch her in the head. The severity of the abuse left the household in constant fear and turmoil. Soon after Erica was reported missing, Sandy and Casey Parsons hired an attorney, seemingly aware that suspicion was turning toward them. Investigators searching the home found red stains, though the authorities never publicly disclosed the results of tests on them, adding another layer of mystery and suspicion to an already chilling case. Exactly 1 year after Erica's disappearance report, on July 30th, 2014, the Parsons household's darkest secrets began to unravel in the public eye. Sandy and Casey Parsons were arrested in Fayetteville on federal fraud charges. Authorities revealed that the couple had been receiving monthly adoption assistance checks of $634, payments meant to help care for Erica. Shockingly, they continued to cash these checks even after Erica was no longer living with them, and they had also continued claiming her on their taxes. Casey Parsons decided to plead guilty to 15 federal charges, while Sandy chose to go to trial. By October 2014, a jury found Sandy guilty on the majority of the charges. As the legal process moved forward, a sentencing hearing was held on February 18, 2015, where Jamie Parsons and Robin Ashley delivered heart-wrenching testimony about the abuse Erica suffered at the hands of her adoptive parents. Federal prosecutor Anand Ramaswamy made a chilling statement. There was no record of Erica during the period her adoptive parents continued to accept money for her care. He bluntly asserted, "The reason is she's no longer alive." The hearing was paused and continued until March 27th, as the court prepared to examine more evidence against the Parsons. The trial also unveiled a disturbing pattern of deception by Casey Parsons beyond Erica's adoption. In 2000, Casey had been hired to act as a surrogate mother. She became pregnant and accepted a $10,000 payment for her services. Weeks later, she falsely claimed to the biological mother, Amy Miller, that she had miscarried. Miller soon realized Casey was still pregnant, as Casey refused to provide medical records, change her phone number, and sent harassing emails. Casey even attempted to sell the baby to her own sister, Robin, who uncovered the truth online, exposing Casey's scheme. With law enforcement intervention, Miller eventually secured custody of her child at birth. Evidence also emerged of other scams orchestrated by Casey, including fraudulent eBay listings where she collected money for items she never shipped. The court was left in no doubt about her character. Judge Schroeder described Casey Parsons as a serial swindler, a label that would haunt her through the remainder of her trial and sentencing. These revelations painted a picture of a woman whose deceit and manipulation extended far beyond her own family, amplifying the horror surrounding Erica's disappearance. On March 27, 2015, the long legal battle reached a pivotal moment. U.S. District Judge Thomas Schroeder handed down sentences to the Parsons couple. Casey Parsons received 10 years in federal prison, while her husband Sandy was sentenced to 8 years for fraud. In his remarks, Judge Schroeder left no doubt about the gravity of the situation. He stated that Casey appeared to be the brains behind what happened and acknowledged that Erica endured horrific abuse at the hands of her adoptive parents. He noted that the ongoing fraud had distracted investigators from the deeper, more sinister issues within the home and emphasized that there was no evidence that Erica was still alive. Following sentencing, federal records tracked the couple's incarceration. Casey Parsons was initially sent to Carswell Federal Medical Center in Texas, with her release date set under her plea deal for December 11, 2023, before later being transferred to the Federal Correctional Center in Tallahassee. Sandy Parsons was sent to Butner Federal Prison in North Carolina, with a release date of March 14, 2022. Both parents appealed their sentences, though the United States Supreme Court ultimately rejected Sandy Parsons' appeal in June 2016. During interviews on the Dr. Phil show, Sandy took a polygraph and was deemed strongly deceptive by the former FBI agent administering the test, while Casey refused to complete the test, citing intense pain that couldn't validate results. The fallout from Erica's disappearance extended beyond the Parsons' own imprisonment. On August 27, 2013, the couple had moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and shortly afterward, the Department of Social Services removed their 2 youngest biological children from the home. Meanwhile, the search for Erica continued. On January 30, 2014, the FBI offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to Erica's location, which was later increased to $50,000, including contributions from local authorities. In September 2015, hope resurfaced when an Illinois-based tracker dog company, K9 Specialties, arrived in Salisbury at the request of concerned residents. After another round of intensive searches and questioning, the grim truth finally came to light on September 29, 2016. Sandy Parsons led investigators to Erica's skeletal remains, buried in a small grave near the home of his mother on Blair Hendrick Road, between Pageland and Mount Croghan, South Carolina. Prior to this discovery, detectives had also uncovered disturbing items in a shed on Sandy's property, including a videotape, a hammer, teeth, and Erica's school records, evidence that painted a haunting picture of the abuse and concealment that had defined the final years of her life. After months of interviews and intense questioning, Sandy Parsons finally led authorities to the remains of Erica Parsons, buried in Chesterfield County, South Carolina. Investigators had conducted multiple interviews with Sandy under a formal warrant, during which he admitted to his harsh treatment of Erica. According to the warrant, his abuse included locking her in a closet, beating her with a belt buckle, bending her fingers backward, and even choking her. Dr. Cynthia Brown of the University of North Carolina School of Medicine described the horrific ordeal as child torture, emphasizing the severity and cruelty Erica endured. The warrant detailed how investigators from Rowan County were able to uncover Erica's final resting place. In August, Sandy confessed to Rowan County Sheriff's investigator Chad Moose that Erica was dead. He recounted the abuse she suffered and revealed how her body had been disposed of. Sandy admitted that Erica's body was discarded on December 19, 2011, off Taylor Chapel Road in Pageland, South Carolina, near his mother's home. To recover Erica's remains, investigators worked closely with Rowan County District Attorney Brandy Cook to secure temporary release for Sandy Parsons from federal custody. On September 20th, a judge issued an official order for custody of a federal inmate, allowing an escort team to bring Sandy from Butner Federal Prison to Pageland. There, he guided authorities to Erica's clandestine grave. Once the body was recovered, Sandy was promptly returned to prison. The autopsy painted a chilling picture of Erica's final days. The North Carolina Office of the Medical Examiner reported that she had died from homicidal violence of undetermined means. Her body showed multiple fractures in various stages of healing, including her nose, jaw, upper right arm, 9 ribs, and several vertebrae. The state of her bones also revealed signs of malnourishment, a tragic testament to the neglect she suffered. The Rowan County Sheriff officially received the autopsy report on January 9, 2018, which initiated the process of determining additional criminal charges related to her death. On February 19, 2018, a grand jury handed down a dramatic indictment. Both Sandy and Casey Parsons were charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse inflicting serious injury, felony concealment of death, and felony obstruction of justice. Casey was brought to Rowan County for a court appearance on March 14, 2018, followed by Sandy the next day. By April, prosecutors announced their intent to seek the death penalty for both, signaling the seriousness of the crimes committed against Erica. By February 2019, the defense teams agreed to hold separate trials for the couple. The legal proceedings moved swiftly for Casey Parsons. On August 2, 2019, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in Rowan County Superior Court and was immediately sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Her admission closed a dark chapter of deception and abuse, but Sandy's trial remained pending. Sandy Parsons' trial was initially scheduled for April 6, 2020, with his attorney requesting a change of venue. However, before the trial began, Sandy entered a guilty plea on December 17, 2019, admitting to second-degree murder, child abuse, concealment of death, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to a minimum of 33 years in prison, to be served consecutively after completing his federal sentence for fraud. Sandy's federal sentence concluded on January 14, 2022. That same day, he was transferred from federal custody to begin serving his state sentence at Central Prison. Casey Parsons completed her federal sentence on November 25, 2023, and was transferred to begin serving her state sentence, while Sandy was listed as incarcerated at Alexander Correctional Institution. These final moves ensured that both would spend decades behind bars, facing the consequences of the horrific abuse and deception that had defined Erica Parsons' short, tragic life. Case 3 Sheila Ray Eddy came into the world on a crisp autumn day in late September of 1995 in the small town of Blacksville, West Virginia. She was the daughter of Tara Clendenin and Greg Eddy, growing up in a modest household marked by both warmth and challenges. When Sheila was still very young, her parents' lives changed dramatically. In the year 2000, after a serious car accident left her father with a traumatic brain injury, her parents' marriage could not withstand the strain, and they went their separate ways. Despite this upheaval, Sheila found stability in friendship. One of the constants in her life was Skylar Neese, a friend she met when they were just 8 years old through a local children's activity program affectionately called The Shack. Their bond would follow them for years, a link between childhood innocence and the complexities of adolescence. As Sheila entered her teenage years, another major change came in her life. In 2010, her mother remarried, and the family moved from their quiet hometown to Morgantown, West Virginia. This move marked a new chapter for Sheila, who enrolled at University High School. It was here that her life became intertwined not just with old friendships, like that with Skylar Neese, but also with new faces and experiences that would shape her formative years. School corridors, local hangouts, and weekend routines became the backdrop for a period of growth, identity, and social connection. Around the same time in Morgantown, Rachel Elizabeth Schoaf was carving out her own path. Born in early June of 1996, Rachel was the daughter of Rusty and Patricia Schoaf. Raised in the heart of the town, she experienced a structured upbringing, attending a private Catholic school throughout her early years. The strict environment of her school instilled in her a sense of routine and discipline. Yet high school opened doors to friendships and social circles she had never explored before. When she joined University High School, her world began to expand, bringing her into contact with both Sheila Eddy and Skylar Neese. It was here that these three young lives, each with their own unique backgrounds and experiences, converged, setting the stage for a story that would be remembered far beyond the quiet streets of Morgantown. It was the night of early July in 2012 when Skylar Neese finished her shift at Wendy's and returned to her family's apartment in Star City, West Virginia. What seemed like an ordinary evening would soon turn into a nightmare. Later that night, surveillance footage captured Skylar leaving her apartment through her bedroom window and getting into a light-colored car. At first, no one knew who was with her, and the sudden disappearance left her family worried and searching for answers. Skylar hadn't packed anything unusual for an overnight stay. Her phone charger, contact lenses, and solution were all left behind, and her father noted that her bedroom window was wide open. Everything suggested that she planned to return home shortly. The shocking truth began to unravel months later. It was revealed that Sheila, Eddy, and Rachel Schoaf were involved in Skylar's disappearance. Court documents later detailed a chilling premeditation. The two girls had planned the attack with horrifying precision. In the trunk of the car, they had stored cleaning rags, bleach, wet wipes, and even spare clothing for themselves to change into after the crime. Knives had been wrapped carefully in towels and held tightly under their arms. It was a calculated plan, carried out in the dead of night. After driving to a familiar area in Brave, Pennsylvania, a place they had visited before to hang out, the three teens got out of the car and mingled briefly. According to statements, Skylar mentioned she needed a lighter and turned her back to them. In that split second, Sheila and Rachel carried out their deadly plan. They attacked Skylar with knives, stabbing her repeatedly. She tried to escape, but Rachel tackled her, continuing the assault while Sheila followed. In the struggle, Skylar managed to grab a knife and injure Rachel, striking her above the ankle. Even after being wounded, Rachel claimed she stopped, but Sheila pressed on until the horrifying silence confirmed Skylar was gone. In the aftermath, the girls attempted to hide their crime. They tried to bury Skylar, but the hard, rocky ground refused to conceal her. In desperation, they covered the body with branches, dirt, and leaves. Then, carefully, they changed their bloodied clothes, wiped down the car and themselves with wet wipes, and left the scene as if nothing had happened. The night that began so routinely ended with a tragedy that would haunt the community for years. When Skylar Neese first went missing, authorities initially believed she had run away. At the time, no Amber Alert was issued, as the minimum waiting period for such alerts had not yet passed. Early tips suggested she might have been spotted in North Carolina, but police quickly determined that the person seen was not Skylar. Meanwhile, her worried parents tirelessly plastered flyers across Monongalia County, desperately appealing to anyone who might have seen their daughter. Investigators soon traced the mysterious sedan seen in the surveillance footage back to Sheila Eddy. When questioned, Sheila admitted that she had picked up Skylar, but claimed she had dropped her off safely about an hour later. As the search intensified, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the West Virginia State Police joined forces with local law enforcement. They interviewed friends and classmates, hoping to uncover even the smallest clue about Skylar's disappearance. The case took a shocking turn several months later. Rachel Schoaf, struggling under the weight of guilt, suffered a nervous breakdown. Her mother, alarmed by the sounds of screaming in the background, called 911. Rachel was taken to a local psychiatric hospital, where she stayed for several days. Upon her release, she immediately requested to see her lawyer, and there, in a moment that would shake the community, she confessed to the crime. Rachel's explanation for the horrific act was chilling in its simplicity. She and Sheila didn't like Skylar anymore and didn't want to be friends with her. David Neese, Skylar's father, later reflected on the cruel irony that these two girls were among his daughter's closest friends. Sheila had even helped distribute missing person flyers for Skylar, masking the betrayal behind a facade of concern. Following her confession, Rachel led investigators to the location of Skylar's body. In mid-January of 2013, just across the state line in Greene County, Pennsylvania, authorities found a body in Wayne Township. On March 13th, the U.S. Attorney publicly confirmed the grim truth. The body was indeed Skylar Neese. The site of her death was less than 30 miles from her home, a stark reminder of how close tragedy had lurked all along. The legal aftermath of Skylar Neese's murder unfolded over several years, leaving the community both shocked and searching for justice. In early May of 2013, Rachel Schoaf entered a guilty plea for second-degree murder. Court records revealed a haunting detail. Other students had overheard Rachel and Sheila discussing the murder plot beforehand, but assumed the girls were joking and never reported it. In her plea, Rachel admitted to intentionally and maliciously causing Skylar's death, stabbing her and inflicting fatal injuries. The state recommended a sentence of 20 years, and her family publicly apologized, expressing deep remorse for her actions. By February of 2014, Rachel was sentenced to 30 years behind bars, with the possibility of parole after 10 years, a legal compromise that reflected both the gravity of her crime and her age at the time. Meanwhile, attention turned to Sheila Eddy, identified publicly in September of 2013 as the second alleged perpetrator. Prosecutors announced she would face trial as an adult. Within days, a grand jury formally indicted Sheila on multiple charges, including kidnapping, first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. She initially pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for what was expected to be a high-profile trial. However, facing the prospect of additional charges from Pennsylvania authorities, Sheila eventually struck a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, a decision that bypassed a lengthy trial. Though she showed no public remorse for her actions, the court sentenced her to life in prison with mercy. Because of laws protecting juvenile offenders, even in cases of the most serious crimes, she was granted the possibility of parole, making her eligible after 15 years. As part of the plea agreement, Pennsylvania did not pursue further charges. Following her arrest, Sheila was initially held in a juvenile facility, but over time, both she and Rachel were transferred to the Lakin Correctional Center, a prison located along West Virginia's western border near the Ohio River. As of early 2026, both remain in custody. Rachel has been denied parole twice in recent years, with her next opportunity set for mid-2026. Sheila, likewise, continues to serve her sentence, a permanent reminder of the consequences of a night that forever changed lives in Star City and beyond. In the wake of Skylar Neese's disappearance, many wondered why an Amber Alert had not been issued immediately. At the time, the alert system had strict criteria. Authorities had to believe the child was abducted, the child had to be under 18, there had to be a real risk of serious injury or death, and there needed to be enough information to make the alert effective. Because Skylar was considered a possible runaway and a mandatory 48-hour waiting period had not yet passed, no alert was sent, leaving her family and community in agonizing uncertainty. The tragedy sparked change. Motivated by the shortcomings exposed in Skylar's case, a West Virginia state legislator from her district introduced a bill that would come to be known as Skylar's Law. The legislation aimed to ensure that any missing child, regardless of whether an abduction was suspected, would immediately trigger a public alert if they were believed to be in danger. The law recognized that every minute matters when a child's safety is at stake, closing a gap that had contributed to delays in Skylar's case. Skylar's Law received overwhelming support. Opinion pieces across West Virginia and even national media praised the measure, though some writers also acknowledged potential challenges and criticisms of the change. In late March 2013, the West Virginia House of Delegates passed the bill unanimously. Just a few weeks later, in mid-April, the Senate also approved the law with minor technical adjustments, which were quickly accepted by the House. By May 2013, Governor Earl Ray Tomblin had signed Skylar's Law into effect, permanently altering the state's missing child protocol and ensuring that no child in West Virginia would wait in silence for help again. Case 4 Danny Croteau was born on a crisp November day in 1958 in Springfield, Massachusetts, the fifth of 7 children in a bustling family. His parents, Carl and Bernice Bunny Croteau, named him after the well-known Catholic actor and philanthropist Danny Thomas, hoping he would grow up with a generous and spirited heart. From a young age, Danny was full of energy and curiosity. He loved spending time outdoors, whether casting a line while fishing or racing across the ice in a hockey game. Mischievous yet good-natured, he had a playful sense of humor that brought smiles to those around him and a willingness to help that made him a favorite among family and friends. Faith and community were also central to his upbringing. Every Sunday, the family attended St. Catherine of Siena Church in the 16 Acres neighborhood, where Danny developed a strong connection to both his faith and his tight-knit community. In 1967, a new figure entered the lives of the Croteau family, Richard Roger Levine, a recently ordained priest assigned to St. Catherine of Siena. He quickly became a familiar presence in their home, often dropping by for coffee or sharing dinners with the family. Levine took an interest in the children, sometimes babysitting Danny and his siblings and taking them on outings, whether to swim at the church pool or visit his father's shoe store. Recognizing the strain on Carl, who worked multiple jobs to provide for 7 children, Levine often brought gifts and food from the parish rectory, saying, "You need this more than we do," gestures that seemed generous and caring at the time. Even after his transfer in 1968 to St. Mary's Parish in Springfield, Levine maintained a close connection with the Croteau family. The children sometimes spent nights at St. Mary's Rectory, an arrangement Carl Croteau admitted he was uneasy about. Despite his reservations, he allowed it, trusting that his children enjoyed the visits and that Levine was simply a friendly, charitable figure in their lives. These early interactions painted a picture of Levine as a trusted mentor and supporter of the family, an image that would later stand in stark contrast to the darker events that unfolded. It was a bright spring Friday in April of 1972 when Danny Croteau came home from school, just like any other day. He sat down to a simple, comforting meal, a bowl of his favorite Cheerios, before chatting with his parents about the upcoming opening of legal fishing season. With the promise of a game in the afternoon, he headed out to join a kickball match in a neighbor's backyard, full of energy and laughter. Later, he was seen walking through the neighborhood alongside a local paperboy, the sun slowly beginning its descent. As dusk fell and Danny hadn't returned home, worry quickly turned to fear. His mother reached out to anyone who might have seen him, including Father Levine at the rectory, who claimed he had no knowledge of Danny's whereabouts. His father scoured nearby ponds, hoping Danny had gone fishing early, but found nothing. The panic grew with each passing hour. Yet when his mother called the police, she was told it was too soon to file a missing person report. That night, the Croteau family was left in a harrowing limbo, the neighborhood quiet except for the unanswered questions hanging in the air. After a long, sleepless night filled with worry, the Croteau family received the unimaginable news: Danny was dead. Earlier that morning, Chicopee patrolman Burl Howard had discovered his body floating face down in the Chicopee River, beneath a bridge marking the border between Chicopee and Springfield. The world seemed to collapse around Carl and Bernice Croteau as they were asked to come to police headquarters to give statements. In a move that would later raise questions, Carl requested that Father Levine be brought along, and the police agreed. Levine was allowed to identify Danny's body in Carl's place, and even suggested that the casket remain closed during the funeral, shaping the family's first encounter with the reality of their son's death. The autopsy painted a grim and shocking picture. Danny had suffered repeated, violent blows to the head with a blunt object, possibly a rock, which fractured his skull and lacerated his brain. It was clear he had not been able to defend himself. In a startling detail, his blood alcohol level registered at 0.18%, more than double the legal limit for driving, though there was no evidence of sexual abuse. Oddly, both his stomach and pockets contained chewing gum, a small, humanizing detail amidst the horror of his final moments. The combination of brutality and innocence left a haunting impression. A young life ended in ways no parent could imagine. Danny Croto's funeral took place on April 18th, a somber gathering filled with grief and disbelief. It was a day for family, friends, and community to mourn the loss of a bright, spirited boy whose life had been cut tragically short. Father Levine visited the Croto home after the service, a gesture that would unknowingly mark the last time he would ever step foot in their lives as a trusted figure. Just 2 weeks later, Levine made a strange call to Carl Croto, suggesting it might be best if he wasn't around the family anymore. Carl and his wife were bewildered, unsure what he meant, unable to imagine the truth lurking behind his words. Then, 10 days after that, State Police Lieutenant James Fitzgibbons delivered a shock. Levine was now the prime suspect in Danny's murder. Carl later recalled that Levine never made a single attempt to reassure the family or deny his involvement, leaving them stunned and betrayed by someone they had trusted deeply. In 1972, investigators administered a polygraph test to Levine. The results revealed nothing about the murder itself, only indicating that he was a closeted homosexual. He was subsequently cleared of suspicion, and the investigation briefly explored other possible suspects, names that were never made public. But those individuals were eventually ruled out, leaving questions unanswered as the case grew colder. To the outside world, Richard Levine was seen as the cool priest of his parish. Some parishioners even described him as fancying himself the Bobby Kennedy of priests, a figure who challenged authority and spoke out on the social issues of the day. He was outspoken against the Vietnam War and critical of police brutality, stances that made him popular with some, but stirred tension within the conservative community of St. Catherine. Among the children, Levine cultivated a sense of trust and freedom. He allowed them to sip leftover sacramental wine, and even peeked at Playboy magazines he kept hidden under the seats of his convertible. These small acts of rebellion, paired with his approachable persona, gave him a reputation as a fun and indulgent figure in their eyes. Yet behind the charm, there was another darker side. Those who knew him well, or saw him lose his temper, knew that beneath the affable exterior lurked a violent and unpredictable nature, a side of him that would later cast a long shadow over the community he claimed to serve. Long before the horrifying events surrounding Danny Croto came to light, Richard Levine's disturbing behavior had already begun. In the 1950s, as a teenager working at the Chicopee Parks and Recreation Department, he was fired after allegations emerged that he had fondled an 8-year-old boy, a dark mark on an otherwise seemingly normal youth. By the 1980s, Levine's predatory actions had escalated. In 1991, he was charged with rape, sexual assault, and battery involving 3 boys, and the following year he pleaded guilty. As part of his sentence, he was required to undergo psychiatric treatment and register as a sex offender. Yet accountability was slow to catch up with him. It wasn't until public pressure mounted that the Holy See officially defrocked him in 2003. Over the course of a decade, the Diocese of Springfield paid out more than $9 million to 63 of his known victims, a sobering testament to the scale of his abuse. When confronted by a Boston Globe reporter that same year about Danny Croto's murder, Levine smirked and chillingly remarked, "My silence has been my salvation," a statement that hinted at the secrets he had long kept. Even in childhood, Danny and those around him were not entirely shielded from Levine's manipulations. A friend recalled an incident from 1968 when he teased Danny to reveal a secret about Levine. Danny seemed willing, unaware that the very night, that same friend would fall victim to Levine's abuse. Another friend remembered a camping trip that same year, where Levine and a group of boys teased Danny. When Danny threatened to expose him, Levine's demeanor shifted, and he told the boys to stop, revealing the manipulative control he wielded even at that time. These moments, seemingly small in isolation, paint a chilling picture of a man whose charm masked a predatory and controlling nature, shaping the environment in which tragedy would eventually strike. In the years following Danny's death, 3 of his siblings came forward with harrowing accounts of abuse by Richard Levine. They described disturbing patterns, revealing that Danny had often been subjected to situations that left him visibly shaken. One sibling recounted seeing him return home once sick to his stomach from drinking alcohol, while another remembered him crying after being picked up from hockey to spend the day with Levine. These recollections painted a portrait of a boy caught between trust and fear, forced to navigate the manipulations of someone the family had once considered a friend and mentor. The scandal surrounding Levine also highlighted systemic failures within church. Thomas Dupre, the Bishop of Springfield at the time, who would later himself face indictment on child molestation charges, was accused by local clergy of covering up decades of abuse committed by multiple priests, including Levine. For decades, these crimes were hidden behind a veil of authority and reputation, leaving families like the Crotos to grapple not only with the trauma inflicted by a predator, but also with the betrayal of the very institution meant to protect them. After Levine's history of sexual abuse became public in 1991, investigators once again turned their attention to him as a suspect in Danny Croto's murder. Memories of the 1972 investigation revealed frustrating limitations. Tire tracks at the crime scene had been washed away before they could be properly examined, leaving almost no trace. The only piece of physical evidence that remained was a single straw found nearby. Years later, DNA testing showed that the straw did not match Levine, and with a lack of conclusive evidence, prosecutors formally dropped any case against him in October 1995. Though justice for Danny's murder was never fully realized through the courts, the episode underscored the tragic combination of lost evidence and decades-long cover-ups, leaving the Croto family with lingering questions and the haunting memory of a childhood stolen too soon. Decades after Danny Croto's tragic death, the case was finally given new life. In March 2020, Hampton County District Attorney Anthony Guglielmi created the Unresolved Cases Unit, assigning a team of investigators to re-examine cold cases, including Danny's. By the spring of 2021, Richard Levine, frail and hospitalized, was interviewed on 5 separate occasions, spending more than 11 hours answering questions from police while confined to his hospital bed. During these interviews, Levine recounted chilling details of that day in April 1972. He described leading Danny to the riverbank, striking him with a rock, and then watching as the boy's body floated face down in the water. He claimed to feel heartbroken as he saw Danny drifting away, saying, "I just remember being heartbroken when I saw his body going down the river, knowing I was responsible for giving him a good shove." He attempted to rationalize his actions, comparing them to what a parent might do, but his words were laced with a cruel detachment. He spoke of Danny as a dumb and strange child, belittling the boy even in recounting the murder. Investigators found a pattern of disturbing evidence linking Levine to the crime. Among the most haunting was a letter he wrote to himself in 2004, detailing terrible compulsions and an unbearable inner torment. Within the writing were passages that eerily mirrored the events at the river. The manipulation, the control, and the dark fascination with the suffering of a child. One excerpt read, "Then you met a boy along the Chicopee River who felt no shame, who felt no guilt, who was not nauseated but rather reveled in such compulsions. There you were beyond the brink of control, seeking your only solace in the shame of others, and instead it was shoved back in your face all the more intensely. What human being would not have been driven over the brink in your position?" By mid-May 2021, DA Guglielmi believed there was enough evidence to charge Levine with murder. But fate intervened. On the very day his arrest warrant was being prepared, Levine died of respiratory failure caused by COVID-19 at Bay State Franklin Medical Center in Greenfield. Weeks later, on May 24th, Guglielmi held a press conference, stating with confidence that Richard Levine had been the perpetrator. With his death, the case was officially closed. Decades of pain, uncertainty, and unanswered questions finally met with resolution, though justice would never be served in court. Case 5 Carrie Graham was born on November 12, 1963, in Orange County, California. She was the youngest of 3 siblings in the Graham family, born to Herbert Kopp Graham and Mary and Margaret Elizabeth Graham, née Hill. Carrie had an older brother, Ronald, born in 1957, and a sister, Kelly, born in 1961. Growing up, Carrie's childhood was largely comfortable and stable. with her family enjoying a reasonably secure lifestyle. Yet, like many teenagers, she briefly tested boundaries during her adolescent years, running away from home for short periods alongside her siblings. Just a year later, in Novato, California, Francine Marie Trimble was born on September 27, 1964. She was the younger child of Ira Gerald Trimble and Mary Christine Trimble, née Walsh. Francine had an older brother, Andrew, who was born in 1962. Unlike Carrie, Francine's upbringing was far from stable. Her father struggled with alcoholism and left the family before Francine was even born, leaving her mother to raise the children largely on her own. Over the years, Francine lived with various stepfathers and, at times, spent periods in foster care, making her early life a series of uncertainties and adjustments. Despite their very different backgrounds, Carrie and Francine became next-door neighbors in Forestville, California, and by the late 1970s, they had formed an inseparable bond. Their friendship, which began during elementary school, grew quickly as they spent nearly every day together. Carrie's life of relative stability and Francine's challenging home environment could not diminish the closeness they developed. The two girls became true companions, supporting one another through the ups and downs of adolescence. The differences between Carrie and Francine went beyond their family backgrounds. They extended deeply into their personalities. Carrie Graham was known for her confidence and outspokenness, often displaying a fiery temper that made her stand out among her peers. In contrast, Francine Trimble was quiet, reserved, and more inclined to follow rather than lead. This dynamic made Carrie the natural instigator of the two, while Francine often went along with her friends' plans, finding comfort in Carrie's assertiveness. When school started in September 1978, the girls' paths diverged slightly due to their age difference. Carrie, being a year older, enrolled at El Molino High School, while Francine moved up to 8th grade at Forestville School. Despite attending separate schools during the 1978 to 1979 school year, their friendship remained unshakable. A relative would later recall, "If one wasn't home, we knew she was with her best friend," highlighting just how inseparable they were. Their bond was not just about companionship. They shared adventures that sometimes skirted the rules. According to a childhood friend, Carrie and Francine occasionally skipped school together, exploring the world outside the classroom while cementing a deep and lasting connection that defined much of their teenage years. On the morning of December 16, 1978, Carrie Graham and Francine Trimble left their homes in Forestville, California, reportedly planning a visit to Cottingtown Mall in Santa Rosa. Carrie had even told her mother that she was going shopping for Christmas gifts before leaving her house. But what began as a simple outing would soon turn into a mystery that neither family could have imagined. The girls never returned home. Within 24 hours of Francine's disappearance, her mother had contacted the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Carrie was reported missing to the same authorities just days later, on Christmas Eve. From the very beginning, both families feared the worst. Investigators were told that there was no sign of forced entry or struggle at either home. In Francine's room, her makeup remained carefully arranged on her dresser, and neither girl had taken personal belongings with them. The circumstances raised troubling questions. Carrie, who had a history of briefly running away in her teens, was unlikely to have left on her own this time. She had recently undergone appendix surgery and was still recovering, even leaving her prescribed antibiotics behind. Yet the authorities could not completely rule out the possibility that the girls had chosen to travel, perhaps even hitchhiking as far as New Jersey or Nova Scotia, Canada. Still, for friends and family, the fear that something sinister had occurred was impossible to ignore, setting the stage for a case that would shock the community for years to come. As investigators retraced the girls' steps on December 16, 1978, they determined that Carrie Graham had arrived at Francine Trimble's home earlier that day while no other family members were present. This suggested that the two girls were likely together at the time of their disappearance, making it a coordinated outing, or possibly something far more sinister. At first, law enforcement considered the possibility that the girls had run away, especially given Carrie's previous brief escapes from home. However, investigators could not ignore the family's fears that both girls might have been abducted from Francine's house. The lack of any signs of struggle complicated the theory. If an abduction had occurred, it seemed likely the girls either knew their abductor or were taken at gunpoint, leaving no outward evidence of confrontation. Despite their best efforts, detectives struggled to find concrete leads. Phone calls, interviews, and searches revealed little, and the investigation began to stall. By mid-1979, the case had essentially gone cold, leaving families desperate for answers. In their anguish, Francine Trimble's aunt recalled reaching out to a psychic, hoping against hope for some clue about the girl's safety and whereabouts. This step, though unconventional, highlighted the deep worry and helplessness that consumed their families as months passed with no news. Tragedy struck the case nearly 7 months after the girls vanished. On the afternoon of July 8, 1979, 2 tourists traveling toward Fort Bragg, California, stumbled upon a grim discovery that would finally reveal the fate of Carrie Graham and Francine Trimble. The pair had pulled over along Highway 20 in Mendocino County, about 12 miles west of Willits and roughly 80 miles from the girls' homes, after a minor argument in their car. They stopped on private land near the Jackson Demonstration State Forest, and one of the tourists decided to stretch his legs, venturing into a steep, overgrown area near James Creek. It was there, partially exposed in a shallow grave, that he noticed something chilling, a human skull jutting from the brush halfway down an embankment. The horrifying sight marked the first confirmation of the girl's disappearance. The tourist, shaken, left a can of soda by the roadside to mark the spot before driving to Willits to alert the authorities. That single call would reignite the investigation, finally transforming the missing person case into a heartbreaking murder investigation. After receiving the tourist report, Mendocino County Sheriff's deputies launched a thorough search of the area surrounding James Creek. What they found confirmed their worst fears: skeletal remains belonging to 2 individuals. Both victims had been bound with duct tape and carefully wrapped in plastic before being buried in a shallow grave. Evidence of disturbance, sections of duct tape, hair, and scattered bones suggested that wild animals had tampered with the remains over time. Investigators concluded that the murders had likely taken place elsewhere, with the bodies only later transported and buried at the site. The shallow grave, they believed, had been dug under the cover of night, hiding the victims from view. Notably, no clothing was found with either set of remains. The only personal item recovered was a single-shell earring shaped like a bird, later identified as belonging to Francine Trimble, a haunting reminder of the girl whose life had been cut tragically short. The investigation at the scene took 2 full days, with assistance from the FBI to ensure that approximately 90% of the victims' bones were recovered. Once the remains were collected, they were carefully transported to the coroner's office for a detailed forensic examination, which would provide crucial insights into the circumstances surrounding the girls' deaths. The initial autopsies of the remains recovered from James Creek offered only limited insights. Investigators were able to determine that both victims were approximately 14 years old and likely of Caucasian descent, and forensic evidence suggested they had probably been murdered around December 8, 1978, just days before they were reported missing. At first, the coroner could not even confirm the victims' sexes due to the advanced state of decomposition. However, after consulting with a forensic pathologist, it was established that one of the victims was male and the other female, a perplexing discovery given the girl's case. By 1980, all tests on the remains had been completed, providing key details about the victims' ages, approximate heights, and physical characteristics. Despite these findings, the exact cause of death remained elusive. The bodies were largely skeletal, and there was no clear evidence of trauma on the bones. Still, both the coroner and the forensic pathologist could not rule out the possibility that the girls had been strangled, leaving their deaths shrouded in uncertainty and deepening the haunting mystery surrounding their final moments. While it was confirmed that both victims were of Caucasian descent, the coroner and forensic pathologist could not pinpoint their exact ethnic backgrounds, and there remained uncertainty about the precise gender of one of the bodies, which was initially believed to be male. Early autopsy reports also mistakenly suggested a possible familial relationship between the two, even stating there was a high probability they were a brother and sister, an error that added confusion to an already perplexing case. The first body recovered, later identified as Francine Trimble, was estimated to stand between 5 feet 3 inches, 160 centimeters, and 6 feet, 180 centimeters, with a likely height of around 5 feet 5.5 inches, 166 centimeters. Her age was initially placed somewhere between 10 and 20 years, though investigators suspected she was no older than 14 at the time of her death. Among the few personal effects discovered, a single bird-shaped earring was found with her remains. The earring appeared to be handmade from a shell-like material, reminiscent of jewelry commonly associated with hippie culture and Native American crafts, serving as a small but poignant link to the life she once lived. The second body recovered from James Creek, the one initially believed to be male, was later identified as Carrie Graham. Early estimates of her height range between 5 feet 2 inches, 157 centimeters, and 5 feet 11 inches, 180 centimeters, with investigators suggesting she might have been about 5 feet 5 inches, 170 centimeters tall. In reality, Carrie had been just 4 feet 9 inches, 145 centimeters, significantly shorter than first thought. Her age was also roughly estimated between 10 and 20 years, though evidence pointed to her being no older than 13. Like Francine, Carrie had light brown hair and had received excellent dental care, with no fillings or major dental work, a small detail that would later help confirm her identity. After the initial autopsies were completed, both girls were laid to rest in a cement crypt at Russian River Cemetery in Ukiah, California. For official purposes, the body initially thought to be male was cataloged under case file number 111 UMCA, while the remains confirmed to be female received case file number 131 UFCA. These designations marked the somber conclusion of the early forensic phase of one of California's most haunting missing person cases. By 1985, 6 years had passed since the tragic discovery of the girls' remains at James Creek, and they still remained unidentified. That year, investigators submitted all evidence to the FBI for additional examination, hoping new forensic technology might shed light on the case. Despite this effort, the investigation largely went cold for the next 15 years, leaving families desperate for answers. Between 2000 and 2011, the remains were exhumed multiple times to undergo further forensic analysis, as investigators sought to finally determine the victims' identities. During one of these examinations in 2000, experts began to question the long-standing assumption that the victims were related. A detailed review of the girls' dental charts revealed differences too significant for them to have been biologically connected. Forensic odontologist Jim would closely analyze the jawbones and dentition of each victim and concluded that the girls could not have been siblings. He also suggested that both victims were likely female, challenging earlier assumptions made during the initial autopsies. The following year, this theory was formally confirmed through mitochondrial DNA testing, which conclusively proved that the two victims were not maternally related, finally correcting a decades-old misconception and bringing investigators one step closer to identifying the girls. Even after it was confirmed that the two victims were not related, questions lingered about why they were together at the time of their deaths. Some speculated that the girls may have shared a close friendship, or perhaps even a romantic connection, which could explain why they were together that fateful day. Investigators also considered the possibility that the pair had been runaways or had traveled from far away, as there were no contemporary missing persons reports in California between late 1978 and early 1979 that matched the victims' physical characteristics. Some theories even suggested they could have hitchhiked from the Midwest or other distant states, making the case even more puzzling. Beginning in the 1990s, forensic experts attempted to give the victims a face. Early facial reconstructions were created as clay sculptures, built using three-dimensional photographs of the skulls. These models allowed the public and law enforcement to visualize how the victims might have looked in life. As technology advanced, these clay models were eventually replaced with digital reconstructions, still depicting the victims as a presumed male and female, and released to the media in the early 2000s to generate new leads. In July 2012, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, released updated digital renderings of the victims' faces. Using modern CT scans of the skulls and the expertise of a forensic anthropologist, investigators were able to create more accurate, three-dimensional reconstructions of how the girls likely appeared in life. These new analyses also narrowed the victims' ages to between 13 and 15 years old at the time of their deaths. Although the anthropologists still acknowledged the earlier 1980 conclusion that one of the skulls had initially been thought to belong to a male. The entire process drew media attention. BBC America covered the case as part of a documentary series titled Naming the Dead, paying to have the remains exhumed in 2011. The program explored how modern technology, forensic artistry, the internet, and determined law enforcement work together to identify previously unknown victims of child murders. Within this series, the two victims from James Creek were featured as the primary case, highlighting the lengths investigators go to bring closure to cold cases and to finally restore identities to those who had been lost for decades. For decades, there had been confusion surrounding the identity of Carrie Graham's remains. Until 2014, primary sources had incorrectly listed her as male, a mistake that persisted through decades of forensic records. Complicating matters further, some missing persons reports had erroneously recorded the girl's disappearance as December 24, 1979, when in fact Carrie had been reported missing on December 24, 1978, and Francine Trimble had been reported missing within 24 hours of her disappearance. These early errors meant that for years, neither girl was ever considered a potential match for the unidentified remains at James Creek. The breakthrough came after renewed public attention following the 2012 screening of BBC America's documentary series, which highlighted the meticulous work of forensic artists at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. Motivated by the series, one of Carrie Graham's siblings contacted authorities, expressing concern that one of the decedents could be her long-missing sister. She confirmed that Carrie had been with Francine Trimble at the time of her disappearance. Shortly after, investigators collected DNA samples from family members of both girls. These samples were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, as well as the NCMEC DNA database, allowing for comparison against unidentified decedents and unsolved murders nationwide. This crucial step would ultimately lead to the long-awaited identification of both Carrie Graham and Francine Trimble, finally bringing clarity to a mystery that had spanned more than 3 decades. The DNA comparisons ultimately confirmed what Carrie Graham's sibling had suspected all along. After 36 years, the two victims were formally identified as Carrie and Graham and Francine Marie Trimble. Their identifications were officially made in November 2015, and the news was publicly shared in a joint press conference held in February 2016 by the Mendocino and Sonoma County Sheriff's Offices in Ukiah, California. For decades, the remains have been misidentified as a young boy and a girl, in part because the skeletal structure of young females can resemble that of males until physical maturity, contributing to the confusion. During the press conference, a forensic expert involved in the reconstruction of the girls' faces reflected on the extraordinary collaboration. It's been such a collaborative effort, giving these victims back their names, an identity that has been lost for 30-plus years. It's extraordinary that we were able to help the investigation and these families find answers to their questions. I can't sum up how incredible that is. In February 2016, the remains of Carrie and Francine were released to their families. One family member acknowledged the long, painful wait, saying that while both families had largely resigned themselves to the possibility that the girls had fallen victim to foul play, they were now relieved and grateful to have the girls' identities confirmed. With this closure, both families could finally give Carrie and Francine the dignified burial they had been denied for over 3 decades, finally bringing a small measure of peace after so many years of uncertainty. Even after the long-awaited identification of Carrie and Graham and Francine Marie Trimble, the case did not end. Investigators in Mendocino County have made it clear that although no official suspect have been publicly named, the investigation into the girls' murders remains open and active. In fact, authorities have described the case as being as active as it's ever been, emphasizing that the identification of the victims has only strengthened their determination to find answers. Mendocino County Sheriff Tom Allman has stated that now that the girls have been identified, investigators are focusing intensely on reconstructing the final hours leading up to December 16, 1978. Their hope is that someone, somewhere, may remember a detail, no matter how small, that could point to the person or persons responsible not only for the murders, but also for the deliberate concealment of the girls' remains near Highway 20. Over the years, there have been unexpected twists. In 2000, a man incarcerated in a New Jersey prison falsely confessed to killing the girls. His claim was taken seriously at first, and even led to the first exhumation of the remains for additional testing. However, investigators quickly uncovered the truth. At the time of the murders in 1978, the man would have been only around 12 years old, and records showed he had never left New Jersey. Authorities believe he fabricated the confession after reading about the case in a newspaper, seeking attention rather than justice. Today, the murders of Carrie Graham and Francine Trimble remain unsolved. More than 4 decades later, investigators continue to follow leads, re-examine evidence, and rely on advancements in forensic science. The hope remains that one day, the person responsible will be identified, and that the girls who were finally given back their names will also receive the justice they deserve. Even today, investigators say there are still critical questions left unanswered. Authorities in Mendocino County have openly stated that they are eager to uncover more details about the girls' final hours, not only to identify the person responsible, but also to conclusively establish every circumstance surrounding their deaths. While the evidence strongly indicates foul play, detectives continue working to piece together exactly what happened on December 16, 1978. One of the biggest mysteries remains the girls' plans that day. It is still unknown whether Carrie Graham and Francine Marie Trimble actually hitchhiked to Cottingtown Mall in Santa Rosa, whether they ever reached Santa Rosa at all, or if the mall's story was simply a cover for other plans. According to a friend, Eileen Getz, she last saw the 2 girls on the grounds of El Molino High School on the day they vanished. The 3 reportedly stood near the tennis courts in a parking lot, smoking cigarettes. Getz later recalled that neither Carrie nor Francine had attended school that day. Instead, they told her they planned to hitchhike to a party in Santa Rosa. They even invited her to join them, but she declined. Another friend later claimed she saw the girls hitchhiking near a local Chevron gas station that same day. If true, this sighting could have been one of the last confirmed moments anyone saw them alive. Over the years, speculation has extended toward several known criminals active in California during the late 1970s. Names such as Rodney Alcala and Gerald Gallego and Charlene Gallego have surfaced as potential persons of interest, largely because of their known patterns of targeting young females during that era. Investigators have also considered whether there could be a connection to the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, though those confirmed crimes occurred between 1972 and 1976, predating Carrie and Francine's disappearance. Despite decades of investigation, forensic advancements, media coverage, and renewed public attention, no definitive suspect has ever been officially named in the murders of Carrie Graham and Francine Trimble. More than 40 years later, the case remains open, waiting for the one piece of information that could finally bring justice to 2 girls who left home one December afternoon and never returned. Case 6 on the morning her remains were finally discovered. Investigators were met with a scene so disturbing that it would haunt the case for decades. The victim was a young woman who had been 9 months pregnant with a baby girl. Forensic examination later confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. She had been strangled, and after she was already dead, a gunshot was fired into her neck. Authorities determined that the bullet wound occurred post-mortem. an act that suggested rage, control, or perhaps an attempt to mislead investigators. What made the crime even more shocking was what followed. Her body had been carefully dismembered using a serrated blade. Experts would later explain that the cuts did not reflect the precision of a trained surgeon, but they were also not careless or chaotic. The removal of her nose, breasts, and ears appeared deliberate. Those parts of her body were never recovered, leaving behind painful questions that have never been answered. The brutality did not end there. The remains of the woman and her unborn daughter were separated and concealed inside 3 identical vinyl suitcases. 2 of the cases had a red, blue, and white stripe pattern, while the third was tan with a plaid design. Each suitcase was the same size, suggesting they may have been purchased together. Investigators noticed something else chilling. All 3 pieces of luggage had once been spray-painted black. The paint appeared to have been applied in an effort to disguise their original appearance. Even the handles had been cut off, possibly to prevent fingerprints or to make the suitcases harder to trace back to a store or owner. Every detail pointed to planning rather than panic. The disposal of the remains revealed even more about the killer's intent. The suitcases were thrown from a bridge over the Lehigh River in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania, along Interstate 80. Detectives later concluded that they were likely tossed from a vehicle traveling westbound. The person responsible had likely intended for the luggage to plunge directly into the river below, where the current might carry them away and destroy evidence. But that plan did not unfold as expected. Instead of sinking into deep water, 2 of the suitcases landed roughly 20 feet from the river in a wooded area. The third suitcase, the one containing the victim's head and the unborn child, came to rest along the riverbank. It was this tragic miscalculation that ultimately allowed the crime to be uncovered, setting in motion an investigation that would stretch on for years. The drop from the bridge was steep, nearly 300 feet down. When the suitcases struck the ground below, the impact was powerful enough to force 2 of them open. Their contents spilled out into the brush and along the rocky terrain near the riverbank. The sight was devastating. The victim's head lay exposed, along with the remains of her unborn daughter. The torso, which had been divided into 2 sections, was also visible. What may have been intended as a hidden disposal became a horrifying discovery scene, scattered and impossible to ignore. The violence of the fall ensured that the crime could no longer remain concealed. As investigators combed through the area in the days that followed, they began uncovering additional clues, small details that could potentially speak louder than the brutality itself. Among the debris were pieces of straw and fragments of packaging foam, materials often used in shipping or storage. There was also a waterlogged bedspread tangled among the remains. It was reddish-orange in color and decorated with delicate yellow and pink embroidered flowers. The fabric was identified as chenille, a textured material commonly used in home bedding during the 1970s. The blanket may have once belonged to a bedroom somewhere, a quiet domestic space that stood in chilling contrast to the crime it became part of. Even more telling were fragments of newspaper found stuck to the damp fabric and wrapped around portions of the body. Despite being soaked and deteriorated, enough of the print remained legible for forensic teams to identify it as an edition of the New York Sunday dated September 26, 1976. That detail would prove significant. Circulation records later linked that particular issue primarily to northern New Jersey. For investigators, this discovery offered a rare geographic clue, suggesting that either the victim or the person responsible may have had ties to that region. In a case filled with brutality and unanswered questions, these fragile scraps of paper became one of the few threads detectives could follow. Authorities carefully gathered the remains from the wooded area and along the riverbank, placing them into plastic evidence bags. The scene was methodically processed before everything was transported to nearby Gnadin-Houghton Hospital in Pennsylvania for further examination. Even seasoned investigators were shaken by the brutality of what they had witnessed. But the next critical step was clear. They needed answers, and those answers would have to come from a forensic autopsy. On December 23, 1976, a 3-hour autopsy was conducted. The medical examiner determined that the victim was a white female, likely in her late teens or early 20s. Despite the thorough examination, her name remained a mystery. There were no identification documents, no immediate missing persons match, and no clear indication of who she had been. The official cause of death was ruled as strangulation. Although she had also been shot in the neck, forensic evidence confirmed that the gunshot wound occurred after her death. This detail suggested the shooting was not the primary cause, but rather an additional act carried out once she was already gone. The examination also provided a clearer picture of the young woman herself. She stood somewhere between 4 feet 11 inches and 5 feet 4 inches tall. Due to her advanced pregnancy, she had been carrying a full-term baby girl. Her weight was estimated between 140 and 150 pounds. Her hair was shoulder length, dark brown, and showed no signs of dye treatment. Her blood type was identified as type O, a detail investigators hoped might eventually assist in identifying her through family connections. There were also distinctive physical features that detectives believed could one day help put a name to her face. A noticeable scar, measuring between 2 and 6 inches long, was located just above one of her heels, possibly from a childhood injury or surgical procedure. On her face were 2 small moles, one above her left eye and another on her left cheek. Medical experts suggested these may have developed during her pregnancy due to hormonal changes. These small, human details, a scar, 2 moles, the natural color of her hair, were all that remained to describe a young woman who had once lived, breathed, and carried a child of her own. As forensic specialists continued their examination, even more details about the young woman's life began to surface. Details that painted a quiet, human picture beneath the horror of her death. Dental records showed that before she reached her teenage years, several of her molars had been extracted and she had received multiple fillings. There were no false teeth or advanced dental prosthetics, suggesting she had once had access to basic dental care. However, that care had not continued in recent years. At the time of her death in December 1976, she was suffering from severe tooth decay. One of her front incisors was visibly fractured, a break significant enough that experts noted it would have caused constant, intense pain. It was the kind of injury that would have made eating and even speaking uncomfortable, yet there was no sign she had sought treatment. The condition of her teeth would become one of the most important clues in the investigation. Specialists studied her tooth enamel and noticed patterns that suggested she had not been born in the United States. The chemical composition indicated she had likely spent her early childhood in Europe before relocating to America prior to her teenage years. An early anthropological assessment pointed specifically toward the Balkan region, possibly Serbia or Croatia. While this conclusion was not definitive, it opened an entirely new direction for investigators who had initially assumed she might be a local resident. To refine these findings, isotope testing was conducted on samples of her hair, teeth, and bones. These advanced scientific analyses revealed a timeline of movement. The results suggested she had been living in the United States for approximately 5 to 10 years before her death. Evidence further indicated she most likely resided in Tennessee or in nearby southeastern state during her final years. Even more heartbreakingly, testing on the unborn child confirmed that the pregnancy had developed while the mother was living in the southeastern region of the country. Through science, fragments of her journey slowly emerged. A childhood in Europe, a move to America, years spent in the South, and then a violent and far from the place investigators believe she may have called home. Yet despite all of these revelations, her name remained unknown. In the days following the discovery in December 1976, investigators moved quickly to preserve every possible piece of identifying information. The victim was fingerprinted, and her dental structure was carefully charted in detail. Each filling, extraction, and imperfection was recorded in hopes that a dentist somewhere might recognize the work. Law enforcement agencies compared her information against missing persons reports across the United States and Canada. At the time, however, every potential match was ruled out. No family had come forward. No report aligned closely enough. She remained unnamed. During the autopsy, the medical examiner documented a strange and puzzling detail. Written in ink on the palm of her left hand were a series of characters. The letters WSR, followed by what appeared to be the number 4 or 5, and then another number that looked like either 4 or 7. The ink resembled that of a standard pen. Because the writing appeared on her left palm, investigators speculated that if she had written it herself, she was likely right-handed. The meaning behind the letters and numbers has never been confirmed. Was a name? An address? A code? Or something written in a moment of fear? The mystery of those few characters has lingered for decades. Her fingerprints were submitted to the FBI's national database, but no match was found. With no identification through dental records or prints, authorities turned to the public. A composite sketch was created based on forensic findings, and her image was released to media outlets. Newspapers across the country carried the story, hoping someone might recognize her face or remember a missing loved one who fit the description. Despite the exposure, only a handful of weak leads surfaced, none strong enough to reveal her identity. Years passed without answers. In 1983, after nearly 7 years of remaining unidentified, the young woman was buried. Even in death, she had no name, only a case file and a growing sense of sorrow surrounding her story. But investigators never truly gave up. In 2007, her remains were exhumed in an effort to apply newer forensic techniques that had not existed in the 1970s. Advanced testing was performed, and a new facial reconstruction was commissioned to better reflect what she may have looked like in life. The case later received national attention when a national center for missing and exploited children released updated facial reconstructions to the public. 2 images were created, with the most recent unveiled in May 2015. These reconstructions offered a more lifelike and compassionate portrayal. Not just a victim, but a young woman who had once smiled, spoken, and carried a child. Even decades later, the hope remained the same, that someone, somewhere, would finally recognize her and give her back her name. Despite the years that passed, investigators never publicly declared the case hopeless. From the late 1970s onward, detectives continued to express cautious optimism that science, or a long-forgotten memory, might one day reveal her identity and lead to her killer. Advances in forensic technology kept the case alive, even as decades slipped by. Over time, authorities worked through dozens of missing persons files, carefully comparing dental charts, physical features, timelines, and geographic connections. 12 women were officially ruled out as possible identities. These included Anastas Benitskas of Australia, Iris Brown of Vermont, Valerie Kucha of New York, Teresa Fitton of Florida, Trini Gibson of Tennessee, Rory Kessinger of Massachusetts, Anna Leatherwood of Tennessee, Georgia Nolan of Kentucky, Sherry Roach of California, Mary Robinson of New York, Patricia Seelbaugh of Pennsylvania, and Denise Sheehy of New York. Each comparison required meticulous effort, contacting families, reviewing records, and sometimes reopening painful chapters in other unsolved cases. One by one, however, each name was excluded. The unidentified woman found near the Lehigh River remained without a match. Then, decades later, the case made headlines again. In September 2019, the Pennsylvania State Police announced they were investigating a possible connection between the unidentified victim, widely known as Beth Doe, and a woman named Madeline Maggie Cruz. The lead came from a former schoolmate of Cruz who had seen updated facial reconstructions released to the public and believed there was a resemblance. It was the kind of tip investigators always hoped for: personal, specific, and rooted in memory. Madeline Cruz had lived in Massachusetts, spending time in the cities of Lenox and Framingham. In Framingham, she had resided with a foster family. Around 1974, at approximately 16 years old, she reportedly ran away to Tarrytown with her foster sister. While her sister returned home after about a week, Cruz did not. In the summer of 1976, just months before the unidentified woman's body was discovered in December, Cruz contacted a friend asking for money, stating that she was pregnant. After that phone call, She was never heard from again. The timeline seemed chillingly close. For a brief moment, it appeared the decades-old mystery might finally be nearing resolution. But later that same month, investigators confirmed that Madeline Maggie Cruz was alive and well. She was officially eliminated as a possible identity. Once again, hope had risen, and then quietly faded. And still, nearly half a century after her death in 1976, the young woman found in 3 suitcases remains unnamed, her story suspended between science, memory, and unanswered questions. For more than 4 decades, the young woman, known only as Beth Doe, remained unidentified. Then, in 2021, a breakthrough finally came through advanced familial DNA testing. Investigators were able to trace genetic connections that led them to a relative, Luis Colon Jr., the nephew of the victim. Through that link, authorities confirmed her identity. Her name was Evelyn Colon. On March 31st, 2021, officials publicly announced that the unidentified pregnant teenager found in December 1976 was, in fact, 15-year-old Evelyn Colon. The revelation brought long-awaited answers, but it also reopened a painful chapter of the past. Detectives alleged that she had been murdered by 19-year-old Luis Sierra, the father of her unborn child. By the time of his arrest in 2021, Sierra was 63 years old and living in Ozone Park, New York. He was extradited to Pennsylvania and made his first court appearance on April 28th, marking the first time in decades that someone formally faced charges in her death. At the time of her murder in 1976, Evelyn was a teenager of Puerto Rican origin living in Jersey City. She had been dating Sierra, who had once been the Colon family's next-door neighbor. When she became pregnant, her parents allowed her to move into an apartment with him, believing she would be cared for. But not long after, something changed. One day, Evelyn called her mother and said she was not feeling well. She asked her to bring soup. When her mother arrived at the apartment, no one answered the door. Neighbors claimed the couple had already moved away. It was the last time Evelyn's family would hear her voice. In January 1977, her family received a letter written in Spanish and postmarked from Connecticut. The letter, allegedly from Sierra, claimed that Evelyn had given birth to a baby boy and told them not to worry, that she would contact them if she needed anything. Relieved, but confused, her family initially believed she was safe. According to her brother, they trusted that she was with the father of her child and did not immediately report her missing. As months turned into years without further contact, the family grew increasingly concerned. When they eventually attempted to file a missing persons report, authorities declined to pursue it, citing the letter as evidence that she had chosen to leave voluntarily. The trail went cold. Meanwhile, Evelyn's remains had already been discovered in Pennsylvania, unidentified and buried under a different name. By the time forensic genealogy restored her identity in 2021, both of her parents had passed away, never knowing what had truly happened to their daughter. The truth came too late for them. However, distant relatives in Puerto Rico were located, and family members in the mainland United States organized efforts, including a GoFundMe campaign to help bring loved ones to visit Evelyn's gravesite. After 45 years of silence, Evelyn Colon finally had her name returned to her, and with it a measure of justice that had waited nearly half a century. Case 7 on the warm afternoon of July 8, 1991, the small town of Elfrida, Arizona, was alive with the spirit of summer. Families gathered for the 4th of July weekend celebration, enjoying games, food stalls, and laughter that echoed through the dusty streets. Among the crowd were 2 13-year-old friends, Mandy Myers and Mary Snyder, both excited to spend the day at the community fair. They were inseparable, sharing secrets and giggles, unaware that this day would change the lives of their families and the town forever. The girls had told a friend they were going to the restroom, a simple excuse that masked the terrifying reality that awaited them. They were approached by 2 men, Richard Dale Stokely, a stunt performer working at the fair, and Randy Ellis Brazil, a young man with a personal connection to Mandy's family. Lured away from the crowd under false pretenses, the girls were abducted, beginning a horrifying ordeal that would shock the small community to its core. In a remote, isolated area, the girls were subjected to unspeakable violence. Both Mandy and Mary endured sexual assault at the hands of their captors. The men, fearing the consequences of their crimes, made a grim decision. In an effort to silence the girls and avoid prosecution, they took both lives in a brutal act, stabbing and strangling them. In a final act of cruelty, their bodies were discarded in a partially flooded mine shaft, hidden from the eyes of the world. The following day, the law began closing in. Randy Brazil surrendered himself along with his vehicle to police in Chandler, Arizona, while Richard Stokely was apprehended in Benson. Once in custody, the two were charged with the murders, a revelation that sent shockwaves through Elfrida. The town, once quiet and serene, was plunged into mourning, grappling with grief and disbelief over the senseless loss of two young lives. In response, the community rallied to support the families. Fundraisers were organized, raising a significant sum to help cover funeral expenses. The impact on the children in the town was profound. A local elementary school remained closed for 6 weeks as counseling and support services were provided, helping students cope with the trauma of losing their friends in such a violent and incomprehensible way. Elfrida, forever changed, would remember that tragic summer as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of a community coming together in the face of heartbreak. Before the court proceedings could fully unfold, Randy Brazil made a critical decision that would shape the course of justice. In discussions with prosecutors, he reached a plea agreement, admitting to 2 reduced charges of second-degree murder. On November 12, 1991, the court sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each count, with both sentences to run at the same time, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. The plea deal came under particular circumstances. At the time, crucial DNA testing had not yet been completed, and the results were still pending. Prosecutors faced a difficult choice. Without conclusive forensic evidence, there was a genuine risk that Brazil could have been acquitted. The agreement was therefore seen as a necessary step to guarantee that he would be held accountable for his crimes, even as the full scientific picture remained unclear. Shortly after Brazil's conviction, the awaited DNA results were finally released. The findings were damning. Both Brazil and Richard Stokely were linked to the victims through DNA, confirming their involvement not only in the murders, but also in the sexual assault of Mandy and Mary. The evidence left no doubt. Both men had committed unspeakable acts against the 2 young girls before taking their lives, reinforcing the tragic reality of the Elfrida case and providing a sense of closure, however small, to the grieving community. While Randy Brazil had accepted a plea deal, Richard Stokely chose to face the full weight of justice in court. On March 12, 1992, he went to trial before a jury at the Cochise County Superior Court, accused of the brutal murders of Mandy Myers and Mary Snyder. The trial lasted just over 2 weeks, and on March 27, 1992, the jury returned a verdict. Stokely was found guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. In addition, he was convicted of 2 counts of kidnapping and 1 count of sexual misconduct with a minor under the age of 15, though he was acquitted of 3 other charges related to sexual offenses. The courtroom reacted with a mixture of relief and grief. The families of the 2 girls reportedly expressed approval of the guilty verdict, while Mary Snyder's sister made a heartfelt plea for Stokely to face the death penalty. Even the jury foreman voiced that Stokely deserved the ultimate punishment, leaving the decision of sentencing to Judge Matthew Borowick, who would weigh the jury's recommendation carefully. On July 14, 1992, Stokely was formally sentenced to death by Judge Borowick. The ruling marked a significant moment for the community of Elfrida, offering a measure of justice after the devastating loss of 2 young lives. Despite the sentence, Stokely's legal battle was far from over. He immediately began a series of appeals, challenging the death sentence at both state and federal levels. Over the next 2 decades, Stokely's appeals were repeatedly rejected. On June 27, 1995, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. Later, in 2006, a federal court dismissed another appeal, and further challenges in 2009, 2011, and 2012 were all denied by the U.S. District Court and the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Each rejection brought the execution date closer, signaling the near end of a long and drawn-out legal process. By 2012, the end of Stokely's appellate process was in sight. The state of Arizona, known for its active enforcement of capital punishment, was preparing to carry out several executions that year, with Stokely scheduled among them. On October 30th, 2012, the Arizona Supreme Court signed his death warrant, officially setting the execution for December 5th, 2012. Subsequent efforts to delay the execution were denied, including a last appeal on November 16th, 2012, leaving the path clear for justice to finally be carried out. As a final attempt to halt his execution, Richard Stokely took his appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. His lawyers argued that his constitutional rights had been violated, pointing out the stark contrast in punishment between him and his accomplice, Randy Braziel, who had already completed his 20-year sentence. The prosecution countered, explaining that the difference was a result of Braziel's plea deal and that Stokely's case had been carefully reviewed, weighing all mitigating and aggravating factors before the death sentence was imposed. On December 4th, 2012, just one day before the scheduled execution, the Supreme Court dismissed Stokely's appeal, allowing the sentence to proceed. The next morning, December 5th, 2012, 60-year-old Richard Dale Stokely was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison. Witnesses reported that before receiving the first dose of pentobarbital, Stokely expressed some personal regret, but he did not offer an apology to the victims' families and declined to make a final statement. He was pronounced dead at 11:12 a.m., ending a long and painful chapter in Arizona's criminal history. Stokely's final meal reflected ordinary comforts in stark contrast to his crimes. A porterhouse steak, French fries, okra, cauliflower, a salad with blue cheese dressing, cheddar cheese, fruit including a banana, apple, and peach, cream soda, and chocolate ice cream. The families of Mandy Myers and Mary Snyder spoke openly about their feelings following the execution. Mandy's mother described Stokely as a coward for never facing the victims' families or offering an apology. Mary's sister mourned the life her sister never got to live, never learning to drive, attending high school and prom, or growing into adulthood and becoming an aunt. They also expressed frustration over the fact that Randy Braziel, who had also participated in the brutal crimes, had been released from prison without facing the death penalty, leaving a lingering sense of injustice despite Stokely's execution. Reflections on the case extended beyond the courtroom and the prison walls. Cochise County Chief Deputy Rod Rothrock, who had led the original investigation into the murders of Mandy Myers and Mary Snyder, stated that Stokely's death sentence was deserved, emphasizing the gravity of his crimes. Arizona Attorney General Tom Horne echoed this sentiment, noting that the execution finally delivered justice for the victims' families and expressing hope that the surviving relatives could find some measure of peace after decades of pain and uncertainty. These final words highlighted the impact of the tragedy on the community and the lasting quest for accountability and closure.